Welcome to the Academic Woman Amplified podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak, tenured full professor, mom of three, and firm believer that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to the podcast today. I'm so glad that you're listening. I want to talk to you today about kind of almost like a script flip for the way that you think about your academic career. For so much of what we do in academia, we are defined by the institution in which we are working. We work really hard to get into a graduate program where the department or the institution or the college has a reputation that we know is going to help us get to our next goal in academia. And then while we're looking for our career home, we think about the different type of university where we might work, whether it's at a teaching intensive university, at a community college, at a R1, at an R2. There's so many different considerations that go through our minds when we're thinking about where we want to do our academic work. And all of that, I want to introduce you to this concept that we've been talking about a lot in our Elevate post-tenure program. And that is the idea of the container through which you do your work. So what I was talking about there, right? When you pick your PhD program or your doctoral program, you're choosing this container through which to do your studying, being mentored, maybe your first, chance at teaching university level classes, your research experience, all of that, you're choosing the container through which to do that. When you get your first tenure track job, you're thinking about within this container of this certain type of university, what do I need to do to get tenure? And then after that, what do I need to do to get full? And so much of that conversation, and sometimes the conversation we're just having with ourselves, right, in our own heads, so much of that is about what does the container want me to do? Right? So at my university, what do I need to do in order to get tenured? At my university, what do I need to do in order to get full? And a lot of times what happens is we let those requirements of the university dictate the things that we do. We let the university or the container dictate the path of our careers. And I want to flip that on its head for you today. And I want you to start thinking about your career and your scholarly work as independent of any particular container. Now, I want to give you some examples of what I mean by this. I want you to really start thinking about the difference between you and your work and the container through which you do the work. And here's the example, okay? If you go back to our summer series on the podcast, I interviewed a woman named Sarah Dobson. And what Sarah does today is she helps health researchers get NIH grants. And she has an amazing track record of working with scholars to get them funded. So she is a grant writing consultant, right? But what she's really doing, and if you go back and listen to that episode, we'll link it up in the show notes. When you go back and listen to that episode, you'll see that Sarah is doing the same thing that she was doing in her bachelor's program, in her master's program, in her work running research centers for public health. That same work, she's doing the same thing in a different container. She's affecting public health. She's helping people who have important public health projects to get funded. And she's shaping, really helping to shape the research trajectory in public health. And that is very, very powerful. And in Sarah's case, and again, go back and listen to the episode, it's a really good one. In Sarah's case, one of her reasons for choosing this alternate kind of container, right? The container of being a grant writing consultant. One of her reasons for choosing that was because of her own physical health. She has a physical problem, which has caused her to need to have various brain surgeries. And doing a PhD and being a tenure track faculty member, you'd be impeded by having to miss, probably unpredictably, 3 to 6 months every who knows how many years in order to be able to manage your health, right? It's not impossible, but Sarah chose not to do that. It was her choice. She was like, that is not a career path that fits with my life path. And I can create my own container through which to do the work. And she did that. She actually did that a couple of ways. She founded a nonprofit, and then she founded her own business. So that's a really great example of the work being independent of the container through which you do the work. Now, that maybe is a very clear example because Sarah left a traditional academic path, quote unquote. She went into the nonprofit world. She went from like research centers to nonprofit to her own business and consultancy. So maybe that seems like too obvious of an example for you. So let's think about a different example. Let's think about a more, again, I'm putting in big air quotes, traditional path through academia or a tenure track path, let's say. I worked with a client in our Amplify program, that's our pre-tenure program, who was suffering in her position. She worked in museum studies, and she was basically running an entire museum studies master's program by herself. She was the only faculty member in her department who taught in the program, which meant that she had to advise every single one of the master's students. She was the director of the program. So she was admitting students, graduating students, managing students while they're in the program, and advising absolutely everyone. And her university did not seem to think that this was something to get extra compensation for, or that she should get course release time for, that they really just wanted her to continue to do that very admin work, right? The work that used to be a whole job of somebody. She was just supposed to smush it into her tenure track work. And also, she wasn't getting paid enough. And she was like, this is a bunch of BS. She was close to having a breakdown many times. And we cried together many times because of the way her university was treating her and because of these ridiculous expectations to shoulder the burden of an entire master's program by yourself, right? So in the process of our work together in Amplify, she decided to go on the market. And when she went on the market, everyone in her cohort was super encouraging. We were like, yes, this is what you need to do. You need to get out of there. And the happy ending of this story is that she got a better job, making like $15,000 more a year with a research budget, a travel budget, and less responsibility. In fact, when she told them, I want to do all of these things when I get to, if you hire me, they said, that's fantastic, but don't do them right now. Wait, you have time. Instead, just do this. And here's all this money. And so it was such a different attitude. When she made that job transition, she felt so much more appreciated for the work that she was bringing. So this is another example, right, of switching containers. If she had stayed in that original container, she would have burnt out. She was probably burnt out already by the time she came into the Amplify program. She was tired. She didn't know what to do next. She didn't know how to get more support. She was working with an administration that was like talking to a brick wall. And then she decided that instead of trying to make that container better, which is one option, let me tell you, I'll tell you my story in a second about changing the institutional container. But for her, one of her options could be to advocate for herself, advocate for more hires inside of her program, refuse to do the directing of the program job without getting more hires or without getting more administrative help or whatever. Like, she could fight the good fight, right? Inside of that container. And I think that a lot of tenure track women and people who are socialized as women or were socialized or whoever will be socialized as women, a lot of us feel like we should just be thankful. We should just be thankful that we have this crappy container where we're not getting paid enough and we're overworked and stressed out all the time, because there's a lot of people who have it much worse than us. And I understand that thinking, but also you deserve better than that. We all do. So, you don't have to settle. Even if you're in a tenure track job and all of your friends did not get tenure track jobs, that doesn't mean that your friends want you to sit there and suffer in that tenure track job. No, they don't. They want you to feel happy and fulfilled and to be able to create what you want to create in the world, right? So that's why a lot of us fight inside of a container that's not a good fit. And instead, what our Amplify client did was switch containers into something that really was able to fill her up and give her many more opportunities to do the work. So the big idea here is you are not the container. You do not have to accept the container that you are in. The university, and particularly the university where you're at right now, is not the only container within which to do the work. All right, we're going to take a quick little mid-reel break here. And after that, I'm going to tell you my container switching story. Hey there, listeners. I'm interrupting, myself to bring you this note about our Elevate program. Now, we are enrolling people for Elevate now. So I just want to give you a little heads up about what the program's about and what we're offering for people who join now. Elevate is a program for post-tenure people who are ready to up-level their career. Now, what does up-level mean? Up-level means that there's something bigger out there for you. You know that you didn't work this hard, this long to be feeling the same way you felt pre-tenure or worse in your job. You've got big goals, you've got world-changing ideas, and you're ready to make your academic life serve you instead of you feeling like you are in service of your academic life. Now, Elevate is a program that we have decided we are only running once in 2021. That's right. We're only running Elevate one time in 2021, and it's going to start in February and end in July. But here's the thing. Why are we enrolling for a program that starts in February? Why are we doing that now? Well, Elevate's a 6-month program, and during the 6 months, you get 6 key workshops that are going to help you create a plan and enact it for whatever that next level thing is for you post-tenure. And you get one-on-ones every month and group coaching every month. It's a very hands-on program, and you work very closely with our coaches. And that's why people in Elevate have great success in just a 6-month short time period. But we're enrolling now during October for a February program because there are people who are ready to get started now. And actually, we're already filling spots. So if you want to get in, here's the juicy stuff that you get when you enroll now. You get 2 extra one-on-one calls to use during 2020. So instead of having 6 calls, you get 8, and you can use them before the new year to solve your writing problems now, to get yourself to the end of 2020 in a hopeful and potentially more happy way, definitely a more supported way. Now, you also can come into our community and start to have the benefits of our high-level Amplify and Elevate community. And those include our monthly focused peer review sessions, office hours with me and my coaches, special workshops and planning sessions, and our January retreat. We're doing a 2.5-day virtual retreat that you must join Elevate during 2020 to be able to go to. It's going to be amazing. Our virtual retreats, actually, we've gotten pretty good at them this year, and people really, really love them. And you will find it to be a great way to start off 2020. So if you want to know more about Elevate, I encourage you to find the link to the application in the show notes and apply. By applying, you will start through our process, which is a process of actually vetting people. Like, we are very selective with this program. So when you apply, you'll get started during that process. You'll get all your questions answered. We'll get our questions answered about you, and you can get started right away. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about my own story of switching the container. Now, I'll tell you 2 versions or 2 points at which I made container switches. So I have a very traditional path through academia, truthfully. Besides the fact that I did leave school between each of my degrees and work, I have a very traditional path. I studied my PhD. I graduated in 2005, and I immediately got my dream tenure track job. I applied for one tenure track job, and I got it. And it was the job here at the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez. And the reason for that, besides the fact that I love Puerto Rico and working in my field of linguistics and bilingual education inside of this context is just absolutely dreamy. Besides that, you know, the man who is now my husband was also determined to work here. We had our sights set on tenure track jobs at this particular university, and we both got them. But when I started, I came into the job and I was hired as part of my work to do help with educational technology. So at University of Puerto Rico Mayagüez, as of right now, the standard load is a 4-4 load. So 4 courses in the fall and 4 courses in the spring. And I was coming into a contract that was basically a 3-3. And one of those courses I had a course release for in order to help the professors integrate technology into their English teaching. Now, let me give you a little context for this story. When I got there, there were 3 overhead projectors in the whole department, and you had to check one out if you wanted to project something during class. And there were no laptops to use or computers in each classroom. You had to check those out too. And there were no computers for students. And there was an English language lab which used cassettes and headphones in little booths, it was like an audiolingual lab with cassettes. And there was somebody who was in charge of the lab, and the students would go and they would listen to something on a cassette tape and do worksheets. So this was the level of technology we were talking about in around 2005 when I started there. And what I thought I was going to be doing was helping to basically up-level the technology, right? To help to get computers in every room and to show, especially the ESL part of the department, different ways to use technology to engage the ESL students. But that's not what happened. What happened was I got there and I was then the person in charge of checking out the projectors and the laptops. And when people's printers didn't work in their office, they would come and complain to me. And I got yelled at a lot for stuff not working. And I was hang on a minute. This is not what I thought I was going to be doing. It was absolutely the definition of minutia. And there was no high level let's talk about educational strategies or anything. So at that moment, the container that I found myself in did not seem so much like the ideal container anymore. It really felt like, oh my gosh, if this is what the job is and I have to keep doing this for years and years, I'm going to hate it. So I went and figured out, could I change this thing about my job? And after a discussion with the department chair, it turned out absolutely yes. I would go back to having a 4-4 load, but whatever, I did not want to do that thing. So that's what I did. And I always was, during my career at University of Puerto Rico Mayagüez, I was always trying to kind of control the container or make the container better for myself. So while other people were doing 4-4 loads and kind of oh, I just have to do this 4-4 thing, I was getting external funds so that I could buy myself out, or doing different projects so that I would never have to teach a 4-4, and I never did. So I was always had a research course release or a grant course release or an admin course release. Went back when they used to give those, which they don't anymore. So I was always able to manipulate the container to be more like what I wanted. And that was a really important skill that I developed in self-advocacy, but also in just not settling, right? Not settling for crappy parts of the job that you don't like. Always thinking can I change this? Can I make this better? What would happen if I did this thing over here instead? So that was one way that I was made sure that I was not just accepting the container that was handed to me. So that was my early career way. And then, I've told this story on different moments in the podcast before, our container started to really, really change. And that was due to the Promesa law and the oversight board that was imposed of non-elected people onto Puerto Rico, which insisted that the university change its model for funding and cut $5 million or something from the budget. So when that started to happen, the things I could do in order to make the container more to my liking started to be eliminated. So you couldn't buy yourself out anymore. You couldn't get course release time to do certain types of admin work or support students in certain ways. And it just started to become a place that wasn't fun to work anymore, to be quite honest. And so I decided to create my own container and really to give you an idea of what this process was like for me. And this is the process that we help our Elevate clients go through. So for me, it was what is my, we call it inside of Elevate, we call it our zone of genius. And this comes from a book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. And the idea is that you have a zone of excellence, which is where you're probably at, but feeling frustrated. If you're feeling frustrated, you're probably in your zone of excellence. And that means you're doing something that other people see you do really well, that other people are yeah, she's great at that, but that there's still kind of something missing. And that was the feeling that I had about 4 years ago, I would say, when I had my last baby. When I went on maternity, when I came back, I was I don't know. I don't know about this. And then I started a journey of figuring out my zone of genius. So it was what is the core of what I do as a professor that I absolutely love and that is my unique gift to the world? And that process led me to create what I'm doing now, which is actually a business that provides professional development programs to academic women and non-binary folks, mostly centered around writing. But as I've been talking about in this podcast, for post-tenure and really actually for both our Amplify and our Elevate programs, we really talk a lot about career building. So they're writing programs, but there's a lot of career building in them, a lot of career coaching, inside of those higher level programs. So I created a container. I created this container. And in this container, I get to do a lot of things that are in my zone of genius. For example, this podcast. I love to talk to people. I think I'm engaging. The podcast is almost at, well, hopefully by the time you're listening to this, we've hit 100,000 downloads. And, I'm teaching. Like in this podcast, I'm teaching. And at the end of the day, I think that teaching part is part of the core of my zone of genius. The other part I do feel like leans a little bit towards coaching. So it's teaching and coaching are not that far apart from each other, but the coaching part is much more like mentoring, right? And that's something that I didn't get to do at my university because we didn't have a PhD program. And because of the kind of some crappiness in the container that I was working in, I was never willing to build the PhD program. That's a story for another podcast. But basically, the idea is that when I got into this later stage in my career, I decided to switch containers. So again, these three examples that I gave you, right? Sarah Dobson's example. And actually, if you go back and listen to the summer podcast, there are many more examples. Both my coaches, Rocio Caballero Gil and Gina Robinson, have switched containers and created containers. Many of the other people who I interview on the podcast have switched containers or created their own containers. And the core of the message that I want you to hear is you are not the container, that you have developed assets and intellectual property and ways of being and thinking and doing, and you have made knowledge that is not reliant on the container. It is independent of the container. And if you want to go and use that set of amazing knowledge that you've created and tools and systems and ways of being, if you want to take all of those things that is your career, that belongs to you, you can take them to a different container. It can be a different university. It can be your own business. It can be a nonprofit. It can be working at a corporation. It could be working in government. It could be so many things. The sky is the limit for you because you are not the container. You are you. And that wonderful, unique mixture of things that you bring to this world, that is the asset. You're the asset. The container through which you are doing the work is secondary. And that's what I want you to hear today. And the way that I want you to think about your career is as independent of the container. You are not the container. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time loving on yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join the over 7,000 academic women in the I Should Be Writing Facebook group. Just go to facebook.com/groups/I Should Be Writing or search for I Should Be Writing inside your Facebook app. See you inside.